The autumn wind carried the scent of sage and dust across the Nebraska frontier, rattling the loose boards of Sarah Mackenzie's cabin like a restless spirit. She stood by the window, watching the sun sink in a blaze of red and gold, turning the wide grasslands into a sea of fire. It had been 3 months since they'd buried Thomas behind the chapel in Clearwater. 3 months since Sarah became another widow in a land that gathered them like dry weeds. At 24, she was too young to wear black forever, the town women said. Too pretty to waste away alone in that cabin at the edge of nowhere. But they didn't understand. That small house wasn't a prison. It was the only piece of her husband she had left. Their dream of a new life, built by hand in the middle of the wild. The horizon stretched on forever, empty and endless. Sometimes she thought if she kept walking, she might fall right off the edge of the world. The loneliness pressed down on her chest until even breathing felt heavy. When the coyotes started their night cries and the wind slipped through the cracks in the walls, it sounded like the voices of the dead. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she drank it anyway. Meals didn't matter anymore. Cornbread turned stale. Beans sat untouched. What was the point of cooking for one? The silence in the cabin was louder than any storm, pressing against her ears until she wanted to scream. Then, from the window, she caught a flicker of movement in the grass. Her heart leapt. She leaned closer. The light was fading, turning the plains into a blur of gold and shadow. Nothing, just the wind bending the tall grass. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her. It had started weeks ago. A prickling on her neck when she fetched water, a whisper of footsteps when she turned her back. Foolish, she told herself. Solitude breeds ghosts. But even the brave lose courage when they start to feel watched. The nearest neighbor was 2 miles east. Town was 5 miles west, too far to reach if something went wrong. Thomas had chosen this spot deliberately. Far from judgmental eyes, far from town gossip. We'll build our own paradise, he'd promised. But paradise had turned to a graveyard. Sarah lit the oil lamp. As the sky darkened, the cabin glowed in soft amber light. Wooden walls, a small table, a bed still made for 2, though only one side showed the weight of sleep. Thomas's rifle hung above the door. She kept it loaded now. The wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere outside a coyote cried, long and low. Sarah shivered and knelt by the hearth, feeding the dying fire. The flames licked weakly at the new log. That's when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching the frost outside. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Sarah grabbed the rifle, fingers trembling. Thomas had taught her how to use it, made her practice, until she could hit a tin can from 50 yards. But her hands shook as she cocked the hammer and pressed her back to the wall beside the window. The footsteps circled the cabin. Not hurried, not panicked. Calm, controlled. Each creak of the porch boards sounded heavier than any man she'd ever known. Then came the breathing, deep and steady, too powerful to belong to an ordinary man. "Who's there?" she called, forcing her voice steady. "I'm armed. Leave now." The footsteps stopped. Silence fell so thick she could hear the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. She counted her heartbeats. 10, 20. Then, in the faint light, a shadow crossed the window. Enormous, broad-shouldered. For an instant, it blotted out the stars. And then, it was gone. Sarah stood frozen, rifle aimed at nothing, until her arms ached. Only when dawn broke, pale and gray, did she lower the gun and sink into Thomas's chair by the fire. Her pulse was still racing. Had it been real? When she rode into town that afternoon for flour, the whispers had already started. "Folks say there's a giant Apache roaming these parts," Mrs. Garrett murmured to her sister, unaware Sarah was within earshot. 7 feet tall, they say. Moves through the night like a shadow. Some claim he's not even human, half ghost, half man. Quote, "Others said he'd lost his tribe, wandering between the white settlements and the borderlands, watching, waiting." Sarah said nothing. She kept her head down and her purchases quick. Let them think she was another widow gone strange from grief. That night, she moved Thomas's chair to face the door, rifle across her lap, and waited. The giant did not return, but his presence filled the air like a storm waiting to break. She could feel him out there, watching from the darkness, silent and patient. Days passed. Nights stretched long and heavy. The unease that once frightened her began to feel different, less like fear, more like company. When she stepped outside in the mornings, she sometimes found small signs. Her water barrel moved closer to shelter, a broken fence mended, her woodpile stacked higher than she'd left it. No tracks, no footprints, just the quiet mark of unseen hands. The prairie was vast, the nights endless. Yet, she was no longer truly alone. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods and the endless horizon, he was there. The giant Apache, her unseen shadow, watching, guarding, waiting. For what? She didn't know. But deep down, she felt it. Whatever storm had begun out there in the grass was coming for her. And soon, the storm came without warning, rolling across the prairie like the anger of heaven itself. The wind screamed against the cabin walls, howling through every crack and seam. Rain turned to sleet, sleet to snow, until the world outside was nothing but white chaos. Sarah had faced bad weather before, but this was different. It felt alive, angry, purposeful. She secured the shutters, dragged the chickens into the small lean-to, and stoked the fire higher. Still, the cold pushed through the timber walls like claws. Lightning split the sky, blinding and raw. For a heartbeat, the land glowed bright as noon. That was when she saw him. He stood maybe 20 feet from her window, tall as a doorframe, still as stone, the storm raging around him as if afraid to touch. The flash revealed broad shoulders, bare skin glistening with rain, and eyes that seemed to burn even in darkness. Then, the world went black again. Sarah stumbled back from the window, heart hammering. When the next flash came, he was gone. Only the trampled grass and the shadow of his memory remained. She tried to tell herself it had been imagination, but deep down, she knew better. Hours later, when the storm's fury finally broke, a sound shattered the fragile calm. 3 knocks on her door. Slow, heavy, certain. Sarah froze. In all these weeks of watching, he'd never come this close. Her breath came shallow as she raised the rifle and pressed an ear against the wood. Silence. Then that breathing again, deep and steady, like a sleeping bear. "What do you want?" Her voice trembled. She forced it louder. "Leave me be." No answer, just the rain's soft tapping. Then a low sound, something between a chuckle and thunder, and the creak of retreating footsteps. She waited long minutes before daring to lift the latch. He was gone. But on her porch, left neatly by the door, was a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Sarah dragged it inside with the poker, her pulse pounding. Inside were fresh cuts of venison, cleaned, trimmed, ready to cook. Beneath that, herbs and roots she didn't recognize, tied in neat bundles. She stared at them, unsure whether to be frightened or grateful. That night, she didn't sleep. The meat hung in the cold cellar, and the herbs sat untouched on her table. When dawn came, she found the truth written in the earth itself. Footprints, massive, clear in the frozen mud. They circled the cabin, each print nearly twice the size of her own. They stopped by the chicken coop, by the woodpile, by her door. He had stood guard through the storm. Sarah's breath caught. He wasn't haunting her. He was protecting her. That evening, she cooked a small portion of the venison. It was tender, perfectly cut. She tried to eat without thinking of him, but failed. When she looked toward the window, she could almost feel his eyes watching from the cottonwoods. She slept deeply that night for the first time in months. No nightmares, no waking to ghosts. The next morning, she found another sign. Fresh footprints by the well. And this time, she wasn't alone when she looked up. A figure stood at the edge of her land. Even at a distance, he was enormous. 7 feet tall, copper-skinned, dark hair bound at his shoulders, bare-chested despite the cold. Power radiated from him like heat. He spoke first, his voice deep and sure. "You are too thin." Sarah gasped. The bucket slipped from her hand and hit the ground. "You've been watching me?" He nodded once. "The widow Mackenzie needs meat for winter." She blinked. He'd said her name perfectly. "I can hunt for myself." "No," he said simply. "You cannot." The bluntness stung. "I've managed just fine." "You grow weak," he replied. "Winter comes. Alone, you will not survive." "That's not your concern." A faint smile touched his lips. Not cruel, almost amused. "It is now." "Why?" she demanded. "Why help me? Why follow me?" He looked at her for a long moment, the wind lifting strands of her hair. When he spoke again, his words struck like lightning. "By winter, you'll have my son growing inside you." The world seemed to stop. The air itself froze around her. "What did you say?" "You heard," he said calmly. "I have chosen you. You will bear my child." "You're mad," Sarah whispered, backing away. "You can't just—" "I can," he said, stepping closer, moving with the silent power of a predator. "But I will not take by force. You will choose me." "Never," she said, her voice breaking. He tilted his head, his dark eyes unreadable. "You already look for me in the shadows. Already wait for my steps. Your heart knows." "Get off my land!" "This land was mine before your husband staked it," he said evenly. "I do not come for earth. I come for you." "I'm not property," Sarah cried. "My husband, Your husband is dead," Ayan said quietly. "And you mourn him in an empty bed while your body cries for life. I can smell your loneliness like smoke." Tears stung Sarah's eyes. "How dare you?" He looked at her with a strange softness. "Because I have known that emptiness. My woman and child died of your people's sickness. I buried them myself. Since then, I walk alone." The pain in his voice was raw and real. For a moment, she forgot to be afraid. "Please," she whispered, "just leave me." Quote. He nodded slowly. "I will give you time, but not much. Winter comes quickly." He turned to go, then paused. "The herbs I left, brew them when your blood comes. They will ease your pain and prepare your womb." Sarah's face burned. "I won't." "You will," he said, eyes locked on hers. "Your body already knows the truth." Then he melted back into the prairie, vanishing between the trees, as if the land itself had swallowed him. That night, Sarah barred the door and sat by the fire, shaking. But when she finally fell asleep, her dreams were not of fear. They were of warm hands, dark eyes, and the wild heartbeat of something dangerous and alive. The herb sat untouched on her table. For now. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. The wolves came with the first snow, their cries cutting through the cold night like knives. Sarah woke to the sound of her chickens screaming. She grabbed Thomas's rifle, heart racing, and peered through the frosted window. 6 gray shadows circled her coop, their eyes glowing gold in the moonlight. Her breath fogged the glass. The wolves were desperate, thin from early winter hunger. She cocked the rifle, but her hands shook too hard to aim. 1 bullet, maybe 2. If she missed, they'd turn on her next. Then, thuds on the roof. Not claws. Footsteps. Heavy ones. The wolves froze, heads tilting upward. Something dropped from above, landing in a crouch that made no sound despite the weight. A flash of movement, a dark shape, and then she saw him. Ayan. The giant Apache stood bare-chested in the snow, a war club in one hand, a blade gleaming in the other. He didn't hesitate. The first wolf lunged, and he met it mid-air, swinging the club so hard it cracked bone. The animal dropped without a sound. Another rushed him from the side. The knife flashed. 1 clean stroke, 1 crimson spray. The pack circled, growling. But Ayan's own growl was deeper, wilder, almost inhuman. It was a sound that made Sarah's blood turn hot and cold at once. The wolves faltered. Their courage broke. In seconds, the survivors fled, vanishing into the dark prairie. Ayan stood over the fallen, chest heaving. Blood streaked across his copper skin like war paint. Sarah flung open the door before she could stop herself. "You're hurt." "It is nothing," he said, but his side bled freely, a deep gash beneath his ribs. "Inside, now." She didn't wait for an answer. Somehow, she managed to guide him through the door. His presence filled the cabin, too large, too alive. He sank into Thomas's chair, his breath coming heavy. Sarah fetched clean cloth and warm water, her hands trembling. "You fought them for me," she said, voice soft as she cleaned the wound. "I fought them because they threatened what is mine," he said simply. Her cheeks flushed. "I'm not yours." He looked down at her, eyes calm and knowing. "You opened your door to me. That was your choice." She wanted to argue, but her voice failed her. His skin was hot beneath her hands, marked by scars old and new. She tied the bandage around his ribs, aware of every heartbeat, every inch of him. When she tried to step back, he caught her wrist. His hand was large enough to cover half her arm. "Sarah." He said her name like a promise. "The next time danger comes, call for me. I will always come." She swallowed. "You can't keep doing this. The town will come after you if they find out." "They will not catch me," Ayan said. "But you," his gaze softened, "you would not survive another winter alone." He rose, testing his strength, towering over her. Even wounded, he moved with quiet power. "Think on this, Sarah Mackenzie. What would have happened tonight if I had not come?" He left then, vanishing into the snow, his footsteps fading like a dream. Sarah locked the door behind him but sank into the chair he'd used. Still warm from his body. Her wrist tingled where he'd touched her. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence that no longer felt empty. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid of the dark. 3 days later, the blizzard hit. Snow fell so thick it buried her porch, sealing the door from outside. By the second night, her woodpile was almost gone. The fire sputtered low. She shivered under every blanket she owned, too cold to even cry. Then came the knock. 3 heavy, familiar raps. She struggled to lift the bar, the door pushing against snow until suddenly it gave way, and there he was. Ayan stepped inside, snow crusted in his hair, arms full of firewood. Without a word, he built the fire back to life, the cabin filled with golden heat. "You're freezing," he said, his deep voice almost scolding. "I'm fine," she whispered through chattering teeth. He caught her hands in his, rubbing them hard. "You would have died. You came through the storm? I will always come." The words made her throat tighten. He brewed her tea, adding herbs from his pouch. "Drink," he said. "It will warm you." The heat spread through her chest, chasing the numbness from her limbs. She looked up at him, this giant man who risked death again and again just to keep her alive, and something inside her broke loose. "Stay," she said. His eyes darkened. "If I stay, I may not leave." "I know." He took one step closer. "Be certain, Sarah Mackenzie. Once begun, this cannot be undone." "I'm tired of being alone," she whispered. "Tired of being cold." His hand brushed her cheek, rough and warm, then no more cold. When his lips met hers, it was like fire catching dry grass, sudden, unstoppable. The kiss deepened, fierce and hungry, yet careful, as if he feared to break her. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, the world went quiet. Later, as the fire burned low and their bodies tangled beneath the worn quilt, Sarah lay with her head against his chest, listening to the steady thunder of his heart. "You said by winter I'd have your son growing inside me," she murmured. His hand rested over her stomach. "It begins now." She closed her eyes, feeling his warmth, his certainty. For the first time since Thomas's death, she didn't feel like a widow. She felt alive, claimed, cherished, reborn. And as snow drifted past the window, Sarah Mackenzie understood the truth. Love could come from the wildest places, and sometimes the heart recognized what the mind could not. When spring came, she would carry his promise beneath her heart, And together, they would ride west, away from the judgment of men, toward a life built on their own terms. The widow was gone. In her place stood a woman of fire and earth, warmed by the heart of an Apache giant. Their story had only just begun.